Oh, baby, it's cold out there. What happened to global warming? I think it's gone away, but the wind chills are here. In New England, in Boston, a record 1 week snowfall. As I understand it, there's more snow than has ever been recorded in the past. And now wind chills to minus 35 feet of snow, not just inches, but feet of snow. And back-to-back winter storms that have buried both the Midwest and the Northeast.
And those storms have turned deadly as well, with at least 7 people dead. Heather Sells has this look at the winter mess.
More than 40 inches of snow have blanketed Boston in the last 7 days, a new record for a city that's no stranger to winter weather. Schools are closed in Boston today, and the mayor has postponed the victory parade for the New England Patriots until tomorrow.
We're asking people, if you can, stay off the roads, try and take public transportation.
Along the coast in Massachusetts, high winds and waves are battering homes already damaged from last week's storm. 2 people have died on ice-covered roads in Rye, New York. In New York City, icy tracks brought this subway line and its commuters to a stop. And snow and salt seeping into electrical systems blew this manhole cover 25 feet into the air, injuring 1 person. In the Midwest, people are also digging out from record-breaking snow. The city of LaPorte, Indiana got 20 inches. Chicago got 19 and a massive pileup on the Tri-State Tollway. Thankfully, only minor injuries here. In Toledo, Ohio, the mayor is recovering from a heart attack that happened while he was checking on the roads. He crashed into a pole, and some Good Samaritans rushed to his aid, not even knowing who was hurt.
I was banging on the window, banging on the window, banging on the window. He wouldn't respond. 911 said we need to break the window and get him out.
Just getting the mail out will be a challenge in many Midwest and Northeast cities today. There's concern around plunging temperatures that will bring minus 20-degree wind chills in Pennsylvania, New York, and New England. Forecasters say something called flash freezing could also make roads dangerously slippery in areas that saw rain and slush before freezing temperatures. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Come to Virginia Beach. Oh, it's sunny, and it was only 22 outside of my house.
Which is, for us, very cold.
It is very cold, but things are freezing up, but nothing like that. I mean, my goodness gracious. I mean, what's all this climate thing, all these hysterias about climate change? The temperatures got cold in New England, but hey, in Washington, the fight is on. The president laid down the gauntlet. It's a dead-on-arrival budget, and the Republicans they should have started earlier with their own program, and they haven't, so they've been caught somewhat flat-footed. But I suppose Paul Ryan and his crew will come up with a Republican budget that will make a lot of sense to the nation. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau. Here's John.
Pat, as you just hinted, President Obama's budget plan has come under fire from conservatives who say it taxes and spends too much. CBN News White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon brings us that story.
President Obama's ambitious $4 trillion budget is now in the hands of Congress. He calls it middle-class economics.
It helps working families' paychecks go farther by treating things like paid sick leave and child care as the economic priorities that they are.
To do that, the president proposes raising $1.5 trillion in new taxes on high-earning taxpayers and corporations, including giving America the distinction of having the highest estate tax in the world. But according to the Urban Institute and Brookings Institution, 70% of middle-class families making between $50,000 and $70,000 a year would see no change in their tax bills. Instead of middle-class economics, some conservatives are calling it envy economics. Stephen Moore is chief economist for the Heritage Foundation.
I think this was not a budget. This was a social statement by the president. It was a political philosophy that he's putting forward, that the way you create growth is by stealing from the rich and giving to the poor.
The president's 10-year spending plan also goes over federal spending caps, which were agreed to by both parties, by nearly $500 billion.
I'm going to keep fighting to make sure that every American has the chance not just to share in America's success, but to contribute to America's success. That's what this budget is about.
Democratic leaders call it a forward-looking and fiscally responsible plan, but the Republican majority disagrees. And critics say the president wrote his budget as though the November election that ushered in a new Republican majority on the Hill never happened.
This was an in-your-face budget that said, you know, we're going to go ahead with our liberal agenda. We don't care what the voters say. We don't care what the conservative Republican majority in Congress says. We're going to move aggressively forward with this.
The president has introduced some of these ideas before, and they failed, even when Democrats controlled the Senate. And another big issue is that the president's spending plan doesn't even try to balance the budget. Speaker John Boehner says this plan never balances, ever. It contains no solutions to address the drivers of our debt and no plan to fix our entire tax code to help foster growth and create jobs. Worse yet, President Obama would impose new taxes and more spending without a responsible plan to honestly address the big challenges facing our country.
The president talks about how fiscally responsible it is, and yet it would continue to raise our national debt by another $5 trillion over the next 5 years, and over the next decade. Now that's on top of the $7 trillion addition to the debt we've already had in the first 6 years of President Obama. That's not going to cut it with the American people.
Republican budget writers promise to pass a spending plan of their own that's balanced. They have until April 15th to do so. Voters who sent them to Washington will be watching. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
The lines have been drawn and the budget battle begins. Pat?
Well, it just makes me sick to see something like this. This is so outrageous. The president is totally detached from reality. The idea of running up another trillion, $2, $3, $4, $5 trillion in debt, we can't sustain that. And he said, well, I'm going to make life a little easier for the middle class. This is nonsense. The standard of living of the middle class has gone down steadily while he's been president. All these nostrums from the socialists don't work. And the idea of trying to lift the little guy while you impoverish the big guy is something that Abraham Lincoln debunked, and has been debunked ever since. It doesn't work. But what Obama wants to do is give an 11 or 12% increase to all the federal bureaucracy. And you ask yourself, if you're planning to get a 12% increase in your pay this year, and most Americans say, no, we'd like to, but I don't think it's going to happen. Well, of course it won't happen, because the economy is in the doldrums. Why? Because he has put so many regulations on the private sector that it can't function. The most important thing to do to help the, quote, middle class is to take those regulations off, to scrap that whole panoply of federal regulations and let the American economy free. But what he wants to do is load more regulations, more taxes, more burdens, and bigger bureaucracy. It's a prescription for disaster, and of course the Republicans will fight it, and any intelligent American should fight it. John?
Pat, while federal spending is certain to be a hot topic on the political trail, the latest hot-button issue is vaccines. Republicans Chris Christie and Rand Paul made news with their latest comments about it Monday, with both saying parents should have a say in whether their children should be required to get vaccinations against diseases like the measles. Some people don't trust vaccines, and others think the government shouldn't require them. Some Republicans, like Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, say there is no proof of long-term problems from vaccines. President Obama has encouraged parents to vaccinate their children, and Hillary Clinton weighed in as well, tweeting a message saying, "The science is clear, the earth is round, the sky is blue, and #vaccines work. Let's protect all our kids." Pat, this is a passionate medical debate that seems to be getting political.
You know, when I was a kid, we all got measles. We got mumps.
Yeah, I did too.
You got, but they didn't vaccinate. We just got immune. But what you had to do was stay in a dark room. You couldn't read for, a week or two. And that was the thing. I'm sure that there's some serious consequences to measles, and perhaps vaccination is the answer. I don't think any parent should be forced by the government to vaccinate. There's so many different vaccinations, and there was a vaccination against polio, and I know the mother of a friend was contracted polio because she took
from the vaccine.
From the vaccine.
Oh,
so all vaccines are not benign, but so far this one about whooping cough and diphtheria and measles has been very effective, and I think it was a good thing to do, and so why not? But the problem is, natural immunity is a pretty good thing, and if you have some of these diseases when you're a kid, you have immunity the rest of your life. And
well, those of us who travel a lot too, I mean, you are wise to take vaccinations for various countries that you go to. But so are you saying that you think the bigger issue is that the government shouldn't be telling parents whether they have to or not?
I just think that, you know, we've got to be careful that we fall for these nostrums. You know, you have to put fluoride in all the water, you know, because it'll cut down on cavities. But what does fluoride do to people? We don't know some of the consequences. That's all I'm saying. We don't have all the knowledge we need, and we should be very careful to not to force people to do stuff that they urgently feel they shouldn't do. But obviously, vaccination for measles, they've got one, it works, and why not? I remember when my son Gordon, my wife was having a baby. Our number, how many we got?
He was 3, right?
But my number 4 was having the baby, and Gordon was and Daddy was in charge while Mother was having the baby.
I see.
And he had measles, and it broke my heart. He was so sick. Eyes all messed up, terrible fever. I mean, it was a mess. And you say, what can I do for this child?
Well, you know, a lot of parents now, I think, are where they give you kind of lump vaccinations for your children, are just more comfortable if they can break them up. And I think doctors are accommodating that. You know, you just span them out a little bit so they're not getting so much at one time.
I think that combination, that whooping cough was a bad thing, and people got it. And diphtheria was horrible. So we've had vaccines that do the job, and I'm all for vaccination, and I'm all for medicine. I just think the government shouldn't be forcing people to do things they don't want to do. That's all. John?
Pat, Islamic fighters from ISIS may have been defeated at the Syrian border town of Kobani, but ISIS could still make important gains on other important battlefronts in Iraq and Syria. USA Today reports that there aren't enough combat troops in some of those areas to take on ISIS. The Kurds have been the most effective warriors against the group. U.S. advisors are trying to help Iraqi troops in their fight against ISIS. Iraq is battling the Islamic State in key places like Mosul. So far, though, the U.S. has not given military training to fighters in Syria who are taking on the Islamic militants. Pat?
I heard one commentator say, and I think that has some wisdom, that the Obama administration has determined that they will try to restrain ISIS in Iraq. ISIS has moved on so rapidly in Iraq because the dysfunction of the Iraqi military. You see, Maliki, the former prime minister, was a Shia, and he allowed the Shia to purge the Sunni commanders from the army. And so with them gone, there was a leadership vacuum. So when ISIS came rolling down the pike, the soldiers weren't ready to fight because they didn't have appropriate leadership. It was all the fault of leaving that Maliki in power, but we did. Now we've tried to regroup and to move forward, and we're having drone strikes and all this, and so we're having some success. But the game is that Obama is not going to do anything in Syria. He's going to let ISIS alone in Syria, and we will never be able to control ISIS unless we make up our mind we've got to control them in Syria as well, because that is their safe haven and their base. So we've got to help Syrian opposition, but we have perhaps wasted the opportunity to find the right ones and to get them going. And the same thing is true in the Ukraine. All this dithering around, we should send several $billion worth of supplies to the Ukrainian forces immediately. because otherwise the Russians are going to overrun that country. And then what we'll have to do is say, well, do we want a confrontation with Putin and go to war? And the answer, of course, is no. So he will take it, steal it, and own it. And we will look like a helpless tiger, and we don't want that to happen. So right now, the Ukrainian forces are ready to fight. We've just got to give them some weapons. John?
Pat, have oil prices hit bottom and started rising again? Prices have jumped more than 10% in just the last 2 days after plunging sharply from over $100 last summer to just under $45 last month. The deep decline in oil prices has led to some cutbacks by oil companies and much lower prices at the gas pump. Welcome news for drivers, falling well under $2 a gallon in some places. But some analysts believe the worst of the oil decline is over, at least for now. Pat, what do you think? Have we dropped to bottom, or is there more room to fall?
We might be searching for the bottom, which means that you might take it down to below $40 for a while. But this is unsustainable. The oil companies can't produce at that price. They'll start losing money. The little independents will be going out of business. The majors will cut back on some of their plans. Nobody's going to rent a deep sea rig at $500,000 a day on a speculation. There's got to be some reward there, and if they don't get it, they won't be spending their money. So that's what I think it'll come back up. But right now, it's going to be searching for a bottom, and then it'll begin to turn, and we should see it go back up to $60 or $70 a barrel. I think that would be.
Michael Medved, the popular conservative radio host, has stage 3 cancer. Medved made the announcement Friday during his radio show and on his website. He said he'll be taking a break from the broadcast while he undergoes treatment. He wrote, "I always knew that it would take something serious to keep me away from the microphone I cherish for an extended period of time. As it turns out, I'm facing something serious. It's called cancer." Medved began treatment immediately after being diagnosed in the middle of December, and he says his prognosis for a full recovery is good. Owners of a bakery in Oregon are being ordered to pay a lesbian couple damages after declining to bake a cake for their same-sex wedding. A hearing is scheduled in March to determine how much the owners will have to pay. The judge says the bakers unlawfully discriminated against the couple by denying them full and equal access to a place of public accommodation. The owners, Aaron and Melissa Klein, say they don't have a problem serving gays and lesbians, but because of their religious beliefs, they can't make a cake celebrating a same-sex wedding. The Kleins said they had to close their bakery after being boycotted. State investigators have recommended the Kleins each pay $75,000 in damages. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.